And co-presenting with me today is Stein Dolan, who is our Senior Program Manager lead on MBAM. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Oops. First and foremost, before we get into the weeds of all this, MBAM is not a released product yet. It is still in development. A beta has been released, which you can publicly get, and I'll give you the URL near the end of the presentation. But realize, since it's not a released product yet, things that I tell you may be subject to change. Dates, capabilities, things like that. So keep that in mind as I go through the presentation. But before I dive deep into MBAM and what it's all about, I want to take a small step back and say, a little bit about desktop strategy. And there's a couple things with any desktop strategy you have you should really look at. In Microsoft, we see that there's really three core components of any desktop strategy you've got. First is making people productive from anywhere, right? And when we break this down, we look at the flexible modern PC. How do you get apps and data down to a machine very simply and easily using virtualization technology? Anywhere productivity. This is technology where you'd think of like branch cache or direct access. Make it easy for people to work wherever they are, be it on an airplane, be it at the airport, a branch office, tech ed, wherever it may be. How do we make that even easier? We also recommend that you look at how do you help manage risks with enhanced security. And BitLocke fits into this area here. And in particular, it fits in the enhanced security and protection sub area that we really focus on here. And then also, reducing costs by streamlining PC management. This is where we talk about how do you streamline application delivery. How do I get those applications down to a machine very, very quickly and very easily? So technology like AppV is a great solution to help you with some of that. And then also, lifecycle management. And this is hardware and the software management. So software comes in the door, you get that shrink-wrap box. How do you actually get it to a point where you either decommission it or update it? What does that life cycle look like? And also from a hardware standpoint, right? Box comes in the door. When does it eventually leave? I'm guessing many of you are going to say until the wheels fall off and I can't use it anymore. But again, you're going to need to recycle that, or do you donate it to a charity at some point? What does that life cycle look like? So if we dive into the enhanced security and protection piece, there's a couple areas that we do look at. One is, of course, how do we protect and manage threats? Technology we use here are things like Internet Explorer, right? Newer versions of IE have technology in them that allow you to have a better protected IE session and protect your end users and the machine itself. And also our forefront technology. So our AV products and some of our other forefront technology products help protect against threats that an end user may encounter out on the internet and out on the public domain. Protecting sensitive data. This is BitLocke's bread and butter. This is where we focus on how do we do full volume encryption, how do we protect that entire drive, how do we protect particular files, so we can use EFS also. So EFS is another great technology that helps you protect particular files. And also IRM, or Information Rights Management. This is technology that we have that helps you lock down or actually limit access to Word documents, emails, and things like that. And then, of course, how do you secure access to resources, right? So making sure that the people that you grant smart cards to and everything else is actually some sort of process you have to make sure that the right people get the right access to the things that they need. Underlying all of this, though, is identity and configuration management, right? I need a tool that helps me configure who has access to what and how do I grant all those permissions. So if you're in this session, I'm going to assume you know a bit about BitLocke. I'm not going to go deep into the weeds on it, but I'm going to kind of level set everybody really quick and just give you a quick summary of what BitLocke is under Windows 7. So BitLocke and BitLocke to Go in Windows 7 really focuses on three areas: the operating system volume, the fixed data volumes, and the removable data volumes that you're going to see. The operating system volume, the way that we've designed BitLocke is to leverage the TPM chip that's in most business laptops and desktops today. Depending on the make and model you buy, you can obviously get a TPM chip without too much difficulty. And BitLocke leverages the version 1.2 chip that's available today. How we actually use the TPM chip is actually really in two ways. First is to help secure the key, and then also for boot integrity. So we actually will take a hash of some of the hardware information and the boot information and store that in the TPM. And the reason why this is important is that if you're on a desktop or a laptop and you turn on just TPM alone with BitLocke, if you take that drive out of a machine and go put it in another one, that data is still encrypted. Now, from a popular key protector standpoint, TPM is obviously one of the easiest that you can set up. The end user doesn't see anything different. The machine boots up just like it normally does. Again, the only difference is that if your cleaning staff or anybody else takes a hard drive out of that box and puts it in another machine, they can't read the data in it. We see many customers using this on desktops alone, desktops that are secured behind locked doors, with keycard access. Because again, realistically, those machines aren't very portable, and the chance of theft is a bit lower. So TPM alone guarantees the fact that if I yank that drive out, again, I can't put it into another machine and get access to that data without the recovery key. The next one that we see being used is TPM and PIN. We see most organizations looking at this from a BitLocker standpoint to use it on their portable machines. And the way that TPM and PIN work is that you basically still leverage that TPM, but the first thing that pops up after the BIOS loads is a PIN screen. The end user has to type in a PIN to allow the TPM to release all the information. So for laptops that are on the road, just like all of us here kind of came out the tech ed, if you leave your laptop in a cab or you left it at the airport or whatever else, somebody would have to know the PIN to actually get into that actual laptop. So even if they yank the drive, it's still protected too. Two other protectors that are actually fairly popular. One is the data recovery agent, also known as DRA. This is basically the skeleton key that would let you get into any drive. So in your organization, you can maybe assign it to a couple IT guys that if they don't need to know recovery keys or anything else. So if there's a machine locked in a closet somewhere, it's been there for a year, you open up the closet, find that machine, you can use the DRA to actually get into any drive in the organization. Sorry, is the question? What was it? Data recovery agent. The question was, what does DRA stand for? It's a data recovery agent. And then lastly is the recovery key. If any of you are, obviously I'm guessing many of you are familiar with BitLocker, where that when you turn on BitLocker, you have the option to take a recovery key and push this into Active Directory. This recovery key is important because in case a user forgets their PIN, how do you get them back into the machine? The DRA would allow you to get into that box, but you don't want to give the DRA to an end user. You want to give them the recovery key so they can boot into the OS and get back up and running quickly. From the fixed data volume side, basically what we do here is we allow you to, of course, to protect other fixed data volumes. So if you have a D drive, that's another hard drive, we can protect that. We have some limitations, though. First, the drive must be formatted either exFAT, FAT16, FAT32, or NTFS. So most major formats are covered. And also, you can automatically unlock the drive if the OS drive is protected. So from an end-user standpoint, you don't want to have to put in another password or anything else. You can just automatically unlock the drive if the OS drive is protected. And then from a removable data volume, it's very similar to the fixed data volume drives. In this way, though, there's a couple minor differences. First, the USB drive or the external drive has got to be at least 64 megs or bigger, right? So any of those really old USB sticks you got in like 1999 are not going to work, right? And then also you can get read-only access to the drive through Windows XP and Windows Vista through the BitLocker to Go reader on the actual stick. So when you encrypt it with BitLocker to Go, we put a small executable on there to help you read the information. I thought I saw a question somewhere. I thought I'll hand, but nope. Okay. So we've gotten a ton of feedback on BitLocker. Most of it's been great, but we've gotten a few customers have come to us and said, hey, I wish you guys would do this to make my life a little bit easier in deploying BitLocker. So I want to share some of them with you because that influenced how we actually went about tackling certain problems and making MBAM. The first and foremost one was when a device gets lost, we need to actually report that, that the data was encrypted, right? So if I lose a machine, how do I go to my security team and go, yes, this machine was encrypted? With BitLocker out of the box today, it was not the easiest thing to do. You had to run reports. You had to do a lot of work on your own to do this. So organizations were coming to us and saying, I just need a simple way to check. How do Microsoft help me out with this? Next one we heard, which is very similar to the first one. I need to determine organizational compliance. If I'm rolling this thing out, how do I make sure that I'm very compliant with the policies that I've set? So I need to check all thousands of machines that I have. Microsoft, how do I determine what my organizational compliance is? Make this easier for me. Another one we heard from a few customers was there's a lot of policy options in BitLocker, right? There's a lot of knobs and dials that you can flip and turn on. Most organizations, they like that, though. They're like, hey, I can customize it for my organization really simply and easily. Some, though, came back and said, you know what? Can you make it easier for me to make the right choices? Show me a subset of this stuff so I can kind of get the big ones nailed out, and then I can tweak and turn the other dials if necessary. So really help me with that. Next one, when a user loses their keys to their secured volume, right? So if a user loses, forgets their PIN, their productivity is blocked, right? I can put the recovery key inside of Active Directory, so I can easily get to it still. But some organizations came back to us and said, you know what, give me an easier process to make this happen. I want to get my user back up and running as quickly as possible. Make this even simpler for me. And then the last one we heard was, sometimes encrypting assets with BitLocker can be difficult. How do we make this simpler? Make this easier for me so that I can get BitLocker out in the organization. So with all this in mind, we created Microsoft BitLocker Administration and Monitoring, or MBAM. MBAM basically builds on top of BitLocker inside of Windows 7. We are not modifying BitLocker at all. We are just building on top of it. Basically, what it provides is that it's an enterprise solution for BitLocker provisioning, monitoring, and key recovery. Our goals are really threefold. First, we want to simplify provisioning and deployment of BitLocker, improve compliance and reporting, and reduce support costs by giving you better help desk tools and allowing an end user to take part in some of the BitLocker processes. MBAM will be made available as part of the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack, also known as MDOP. It will be made available in Q3 of this calendar year. So that's when it will GA, so that's when you can pick it up. There is a beta today that you can go out and download and actually use, and I'll give you that URL towards the end of the presentation. But to dive a little bit deeper into some of this, I'm going to hand it over to Stein to cover how we actually simplify provisioning and deployment.
All right, thanks, AJ. That was a great overview. So when we talk about encryption, encryption can be an intimidating topic, but we all understand that we need to protect our data, and BitLocker is a great solution for doing that. But managing BitLocker and encryption across many hundred to thousands of computers has a whole set of problems that we want to tackle. Some of the problems are, how do you know how compliant your organization is? How do you know that all the computers that you need to have encrypted are truly encrypted? If they're not encrypted, how do they become encrypted? Is there a self-governing process that goes to make sure it stays in an encrypted state? Or like all of us traveling, if you leave that laptop in a taxi cab or it's left somewhere, can you feel confident when a user calls to say, hey, I lost my computer, that the assets on that computer are protected, that they are safe, that you can actually look up to say, hey, yesterday at 12 o'clock, that computer checked in and said it was encrypted. That brings confidence. And another key scenario is just simply, if a user forgets their key, like their PIN or the password that AJ talked about, how can you as an organization make sure that those users get productive again as quick as they can? So all those things are the things we tackled as part of building out MBAM. And as we think about simplifying the deployment of BitLocker, we really focus the two main scenarios around making sure that those computers are encrypted. And when the scenarios we look at is in relation to when the user receives a computer. Do you encrypt the computer before the user ever receives it, or do you encrypt that computer after the user gets that? Some other things we do in simplifying, and I'll go into each of these in more detail here in a sec, is making sure that it's policy-driven, so you have a central way to manage that. And also a way to say, if you've got some older computers out there and you want to be able to make sure only the computers that you want to be encrypted because of hardware issues or other reasons, that you've got a set of computers that can be opted out of that. All right, so in this before scenario, the whole idea here, like I mentioned, is making sure that that computer is fully encrypted before the user ever gets that. That brings a lot of confidence to you and your organization, because you know you're not relying on the user to take action. You know that before any of that user's data gets on the computer, it's already encrypted. That data will be safe in a reliable state, and you've got the keys escrowed and everything's in a good state. Where this works really well is it works with all the standard Windows 7 deployment tools. You can use it with MDT, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. You can use it with SCCM or other tools that your organization uses. And also, one of the things that comes with deploying that in advance is you need a little bit of flexibility. And we really focused this before scenario with 3 flexible points in mind. The first one is around managing the TPM and the reboot process. If anybody's played with the TPM, it can be tricky, and it's probably one of the more complex things around managing or rolling out BitLocker in enterprise at scale. And so there are some limitations or built-in features of TPM, which means you need to be physically there with the machine. You can't script certain commands, like when you take ownership of that, you need to be there and at the BIOS prompt actually accept that. But with just using a standard behavior inside of Windows, what you can do is get that TPM in a state that's ready for ownership to be taken. Get it in an initialized state. Do that at the beginning of your staging process, at the part where you're standing in the lab, you're in front of the computer, you can get things running, you can get that TPM in the initialized state, go through the reboot, accept it, and then be able to walk away and know the OS, all the applications, and the encryption can kick off and run while you walk away and go do other things. And so that's a really powerful value prop in reducing the cost of deploying. A second thing that we did around making it flexible in that before scenario is the process, if your organization wants to use TPM plus PIN as the desired protector, catching that PIN, the personal information on there, can be tricky. You could do it in advance of a standard PIN for everybody, but that's no good. You can do it off employee ID, but then you got to worry about it changing. So what we do here is actually allow you to say, hey, up front, when we're doing this encryption in the staging environment, go ahead and use TPM only. Because the computer will be encrypted, and then when the user logs in for the very first time, and the Malta, or the MBAM agent, that was our code name for the project, Malta, so if I slip that in, excuse me. The MBAM agent kicks in, through policy, it'll recognize, okay, this computer's encrypted, that's good, but the protector, I need to change that from TPM to TPM plus PIN. So it'll prompt the user to collect that PIN. Once it has that, it'll just swap it out, and from that point forward, you're using TPM plus PIN. So it's a very flexible model in getting that personal information on there. The third big flex point around that is if you're in an environment where your lab does not have domain access. For the most part, we recommend always back up that recovery key in an essential server before you do anything. But you may be in an environment where you can't do that, or it's not connected. And so you can bypass that also to kick off encryption. Of course, the risk is if in between, well, let me back up. The value of that is when the user logs in, just like I talked about that PIN change, the agent will also read the recovery key and pass it up at that time. So there's a very brief period of time where if something happens to that machine, you need to recover it. The worst case scenario is you'd have to re-image it, but it's before the user logged on, it's before any data there, so that potential loss is minimal. So it's a flexible point you have if you need that in the environment you have. So again, so that's how you encrypt a computer before the user ever has it. And that really sets up for a great Windows 7 experience. So the user can get on and start running that computer right away. Another common scenario is what we refer to the after scenario. And this is a case where, let's say you've already rolled out Windows 7. And then you decide later you want to roll out BitLocke with that. So this works simple enough in the sense that you roll out the agent, you roll out and you push out GPO to the targeted audience, and the agent will just kick in and do what it needs to. It's a policy-driven experience, which we'll talk about some of the switches you have there in a second. What's really valuable about that is it allows both what you have today in Windows 7 BitLocke, admins can do it, but a big value prop is that we allow standard users to also do the encryption and management of that machine. So you don't have to be there as the IT pro. And also as part of that flow, we do as much as we can to simplify that TPM flow. Like I mentioned earlier, that can be a really tricky part of rolling out BitLocke in your organization. So the design of the user experience really helps set the user's expectations to know that, hey, a reboot's going to happen. At the BIOS prompt, you're going to have to accept that, because that can be intimidating for a lot of users. And if they get it right, we go through the process. And if for some reason they don't quite get it right, we just kind of loop the user back through with more explanatory text to say, hey, here's what's going on, here's what we need you to do in order to move forward with the process. So we make it as easy as we can for the users to take action from that. Okay, so we talked about this being a policy-driven experience. Now what we do is you still have all the policy that you have with BitLocke, because this is a solution built on top of BitLocke. But we add a few more on top of that to enrich that experience and give you more control. Probably one of the big ones that we do is a simple one, which is for fixed data volumes, if you want to set up an auto unlock feature. We expose that, being able to turn that on through policy. The ability to, this hardware capability. If you've got older hardware, I'll talk about it in the next slide. If you've got hardware, if you want to make sure that this hardware is capable, you can define that through policy to make sure it checks for that before the encryption process even starts. You can allow users to request an exemption. And we also have like just simply the interval, how frequently that agent's going to be running and checking to see am I encrypted, or how frequently is it pulling up to the server to say, here's my status, I'm encrypted, here's my protector, and that sort of information. So we've got all that control. Now this one is a new feature to MBAM. This is a feature that actually came directly out of Microsoft's experience in our IT organization of working with Windows, BitLocker since the Vista days. And in the early versions of the hardware, the earlier versions of TPM, there were some compatibility issues. And so what they found, and what IT was able to work with us to make sure we built into this product, is that even though if you target, say, your entire accounting organization to be BitLocker encrypted, if some of the machines out there are older, they have a way of, before the agent kicks in and starts the encryption, it'll check with that server to say, is this make model in a known supportable, is compatible with BitLocker? And if it is, it'll go forward. If it's either an unknown state or a non-supported state, it'll hold off on that. And the way that this works is kind of twofold. You turn it on or you prep the environment in two ways. First is the policy, like I mentioned. You make sure that the agent knows to check for that. Because if you don't have that on, it'll just encrypt without ever doing the check. If it is on, when you do the check, it's about populating the server to know exactly what the makes and model are. And that's where we try to make this easy also. Because if you're managing thousands of computers, how do you build out that list? So what you can do is roll out the MBAM agent to your target audience and let that run, set where the policy to pass the server information to is, but not force encryption, but let it run for a couple weeks. What that'll do is harvest the information off the computer, pass that up to the central server where we build a unique list of those different makes and models. And from there you can go through, and I'll demo this in a minute, you can go through and select which ones are really supported versus which ones are not supported. And then you can push out a new set of policy, which is, okay, start encryption once you're ready for that and that rollout. So it's a really simple way of making sure you're phasing this rollout out in a reliable way to make sure everybody's staying productive. Why don't we take questions at the end there, okay? That'll be a little longer.
Actually, I'll throw a question out there to you, Stein. So
yes.
If I flip a switch, right? So let's say I've got 5 or 10 different models in my environment, and let's say I flip a switch because I get a brand new one, or I flip a switch late and I want a particular make and model to go out all of a sudden. I've got 1,500 machines of that make and model. Does that mean like 1,500 machines are magically going to check in immediately and starting like prompting end users for encryption?
So the question is, let's say, well, you heard the question, but let me answer it a slightly different way. Is, as a computer checks in, let's say on day 1 or plus 2 weeks, it shows that it's not supported, and then you set it to supported. What we've done in the agent is just a time delay. Every 24 hours, it'll check in, because if it's not expected to be highly dynamic, that value. And so every day, it'll just check in to say, has it changed from unsupported or unknown to supported? And when it does, it'll kick in at that point. So there's a little bit of delay you'll see through that, which is good for just balancing out the load. Okay, with that, why don't we take a look at the actual product, show you some of the things we've got going. So let me set up here. Okay, so here we are configuring some of the policies that we have. And so we've got our new node here on the MDOP MBAM. And a lot of these will look familiar, and you'll see some new ones. For example, but one of the new ones we have is client management. And so what we'll do here is we configure how frequently do we want the client to be checking in with that. And so you can set that to default values if you want. Leave it at 90 minutes default or change the value. We're able to say, from a drive recovery perspective, what's the destination server that we need to send the key recovery up to? And so you can set that and change that. And if you're in a large org, if you want to send out to different web services based on different organizational needs, you have some of that flexibility here through GPO. Others you have is we are able to encrypt the OS drive, fixed data volumes, and removable data volumes. And for example, in like USB sticks, some of the features that you have as part of Windows is the ability to deny write access unless that volume is encrypted. And that's a popular way of using USB sticks. And the last one is, or one of many, another configuration is reports. We have a different web service for key escrow than we do for passing up the compliance data, so you can set that also. And you can also set the frequency of how frequently to check and pass up for recovery keys versus how often to pass up compliance data. So we're giving you as many switches as we can. So with that, I'm going to switch over and show you a little bit of the client experience. Yeah, the question is overlap in BitLocke policies, and we're a superset of those. So we take all those and write to the same value. So if you are going to be used, you should set all of the BitLocke policies in that MBAM node, because it includes all of those, and it'll be written to the same location on the client machine. All right. So what we have here is this is the client experience. What we have is just a simple UI that asks the users to take action. And one of the design paradigms we had when we went in this is making sure you as an organization have control to make sure this data gets encrypted, but also giving the user some flexibility. If they're ready to get going, they'll hit start. If they need to hold off on it because they're in the middle of a presentation or something like that, they can postpone. And that frequency we talked about earlier is how frequently this will just pop up and do the user. And so what I'm going to do before I get started, I'm going to go ahead and prove to you, show you that, okay, we're not encrypted. We're going to do a real demo here. That we've got a computer here. Our C drive is not encrypted. There are no protectors.
That's a little small, Stein. Let's zoom in a little bit here so people can see this here. We're not pulling the wool over your eyes. This is real.
Yeah. So here we go. So we'll get started. We'll start off the encryption process. And here we set up a TPM plus pin. And one of the things you can do as part of BitLocke is defining different variable, how you use the pin. So what you can do is a standard number value for the pin, just a standard pin, and you can set the number of values from anywhere from 4 to 20 digits. In this case, we made it 8 digits. And so if we enter that in, if I make a mistake, all the air handling expect to make sure you help the user go through as part of just making it easy to roll this out across your organization. So, what happened here?
You told me to put a disk in the drive for you, so.
So one of the things we do is make sure that it's in a good state. So AJ left a drive in here, a CD in here, and what is it? It's a Windows Vista Ultimate. We don't need that disk here. So let's run that again. The user's there. Its power plug is checked in.
You asked for a disk. I gave you a disk. I had plenty in my office. Why not?
So now it passed. The computer's got power. The reason we check for power, especially on a laptop, is encryption is intensive. It'll drain the battery faster. So we want to make sure the user's in a state ready to go. If there's a bootable disk in there, that'll change the signature of the TPM. And so we want to make sure that's in a good state. So we do these things to make sure that you're ready to go. One of the things you don't see happening, before that UI ever pops up, we make sure there's a successful communication with the escrow service on the back end. So that when the user does when we make the user do anything, it's a high likelihood of success, that they're going to be able to go through that. We're not disrupting them and then erroring out partway through the process. So simple things you'd expect, but things that we're making sure we're doing to make this as easy as we can for you. And so again, just to kind of make sure we're doing what we said we will. The system says we're encrypting. Let's go ahead and just run that again here. And so there we go. There's our numeric password, and it's kicking off. We're at 3% encrypt. Oops, that's not what I want to do. And let me do one more command. I want to show you one other thing we've got, which is still learning this. The numeric password, and this is the key. And so we're going to use this in a few minutes when we talk about how how to recover a drive if a user forgets their PIN or loses a password or something. So with that,
as I say, keep us honest here. You want to write this down. You should see these numbers later, so keep that in mind. So I guess kicking back over to slides, we have one more piece to cover, is the overview. What's the architecture? What does this thing look like, Stein?
Back on. Yeah, so the way we've got this set up is I really describe this in three parts. We've got the agent, where policy is pushed down, and like I said, it's a policy-driven experience. You centrally control that through GPOs and make sure that the agent is acting on the policy that you've defined and takes action on that. With that, what we go through is, the second portion is key escrow. That we've got a web service database infrastructure that is securely, reliably storing those keys. And one of the design patterns that we had when we did this is make sure we've always got the key. Because the worst thing we can do is get you in a state where we're not storing that key and your users are often running and then it would be in a state where you can't recover it. And we'll talk about that when we talk about another feature we designed into this. And the third main component to this is reporting, which is arguably one of the biggest parts about this product, is it's about knowing the state of your organization. And so there, we just have a web service front end talking to our SQL Server back end, and the reports are exposed through SSRS. And we'll actually jump into that here in a second. AJ will talk about what are the different reports we've got available through MDOP.
All right, so we already showed you the client UI demo and the policy piece. So let's talk a little bit about reporting. The reporting is really to help you kind of solve or really answer three big questions. First, you need to know the state of the last known state of a lost computer, right? I'd leave it in a taxi cab, I'd leave it at my hotel. What status was that machine in? Was it encrypted? What level of encryption? When did it last check in? A lot of organizations, they look at this and they go, I need to know this information. What can MBAM do for me? Also, you need to know how effective that rollout is going, right? As I roll this thing out over thousands of machines, how compliant am I? 99%, 95%? This will help me figure out, are there issues with my BitLocke rollout, and how compliant overall is the organization. So when your chief security officer says, how protected are the machines? You need to have a report that you can just hand to them and go, here you go, 99%. There's a couple we're tracking down, we got it covered. And then of course also, who and when are keys being accessed, right? So if you're recovering a key because somebody forgot their PIN, who's doing it, when has it happened, and who are we doing it for, right? So if Stein forgets his PIN a lot, I want to know this. So maybe I can educate him better to not forget his PIN. And also, when has that new hardware been added? So as Stein talked about the hardware compatibility piece, when new hardware shows up, how do we know when it showed up and who made any changes to those entries? The MBAM agent collects all this information to give us these reports. It passes it up to a reporting server no matter what. If the machine's encrypted or not, we're going to send the information up. This helps you clarify why a machine is not compliant. Was there an exemption that was put in? Because MBAM allows the end user to even request an exemption of the process. So they can say, you know what, I travel to China a lot. I shouldn't be using BitLocke with TPM. I'm going to request that exemption, and that actually can be surfaced through the UI that the end user sees. And they can send you an email, you can point them to a web page and fill out a form. All the reports are built on SQL Server reporting services, though. So it gives you the flexibility to create your own reports. So if you don't like the reports or the reports that we provide out of the box, you want to modify or anything, you can go ahead and do so. Create your own reports that are specific to what your chief security people need or your information security guys need. You can do that all on your own if you know SQL Server reporting services. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the reports to get an idea of what it actually looks like. All right, well, looks like that slide didn't build out right, but all right, we're going to wing this. The Enterprise Compliant Report, that first box should actually just say, really what this report does is give you a view of the entire organization all up. It will show you all the machines that you have in the environment that are managed by MBAM, tells you what percentage are compliant, which ones aren't, which ones are hardware exempt. It'll also give you some specific details around the computer name, the domain, what is the compliant status, and when was it last contacted, right? When does that machine last checked in? Was it a couple hours ago? Was it a couple days ago? And you can also filter on some of the information. So what's the status, right? Is the machine actually compliant or not? Because as an IT pro, when I looked at stuff, I only cared about the anomalies. Show me the non-compliant machines. Who do I have to go harass to get the machine encrypted? So I can filter on that information. I can filter on computer type. And of course, the last contact date. So I can see, well, which machines haven't checked in over 3 days? And I can help me figure out which machines I actually have to go after. I'll show you in a demo what it looks like live, but I've got a quick screenshot so you can kind of see a nice little pie chart at the top, a very quick overview, and then the machine list itself. Computer compliance report. So this report really is the opposite of the overall compliance report. This is going to show you one machine or one user and all the machines that they're actually using. So it lets you know if a computer is compliant or not, giving you the machine name and even more details than you get in the organizational report itself. So I can tell you what the OS and the fixed drive and the removable drive policies are, what is the compliance status, when was that last contact date, and what's the make and model. And make and model is kind of important because if an end user calls you up and says, I lost my machine, and you go, okay, you run the report, and what's the first thing you're going to ask? Well, what's the machine name? They're going to go, I don't know. I just lost my machine. So you can put in the username, and then we'll also give you the list of machines that they've been using. So did they lose a Dell? Did they lose an HP? Which machine did they actually lose? We make it a lot easier just to help you search by the actual username or the actual computer itself. And this report is fairly simple. You fill in the box with that information, and we give you that report with all the info. Hardware reporting. So the hardware audit that Stein mentioned a little bit earlier, this is basically used when you look at the hardware compatibility management policy. You flip that switch, you're going to want to use this report to see what's been changing behind the scenes. Details you'll end up seeing in here, the user who's actually made the change, the date and time, the change type, and the original and the current value. But you can go in and edit the values if you want. So if a machine shows up as Dell Optiplex XYZ, I can change it to Dell Optiplex ABC if I want. I can go in and actually modify those entries by hand if I choose to do so. And that report, again, very quickly and simply, but we'll show you that a little bit later. And then, of course, the key recovery access audit report. This is going to tell you who's been requesting the information. Right? So I want to know who on my help desk is going in and grabbing this information, and if they're successful or not. So I want to know if somebody's trying to guess a key and get some information that they shouldn't be doing. So it helps keep your help desk actually honest. It tells you who's accessing the key, who actually requested it. So if Stein's calling me a lot and saying, I forgot my PIN, maybe I need to educate him a bit more and remember the PIN, Stein, come on, remember. And then also, was it successful or was it failed? And then what was actually requested? Was it the recovery key or was it the TPM information? Quick sample of what the report looks like. Overall, MBAM stores a pretty decent amount of information. We store computer hardware information, TPM details, make, model, hard drive size, a bunch of other information that you can create your reports off of. Computer information, who last used the machine, or who's using the machine, what's the last contact time that the agent has actually checked in so we know what that status is. We also help you, determine what is the computer's BitLocker info, cipher strength, policy for volumes, is it hardware capable or not, and of course the volume information. What is that BitLocker state? What protectors are being used? All this is built on SSRS. You can, of course, create reports. You can export them out to CSV or PDF, whatever suits you best. So instead of me talking about it, let me show you some of the reports quick. Jump back over here. So I got 4 reports. If I run my enterprise compliance report here, this is the one that gives me my general overview. Shows me all the details of the overall organization I have here. So I have 7 machines in my demo environment. Shows me the actual machine name, domain information. Is it compliant? Was there an exception? So if a user requested an exemption for some reason, we'll show you that here. The users of the machine, along with their compliance status details, and the last contact date. And of course, I can just go in and say, I don't care about the compliant ones, just give me non-compliant, and run that. So I only have 2 machines I really have to go after because they're non-compliant. Computer compliance report. Just gives me a blank box. So let's just type in a user here. So my end user calls me up and says, I lost my machine, what do I do? Well, which machine were you using? Right, this one. We're using the Toshiba or the Dell? Machine name information, is it portable, the OS, and even more details. I can also just put in a machine name. You get the details of that. You can even expand these out to even show down to the drive level. So it tells me here that the C drive is encrypted. This machine is compliant with TPM and PIN, with a cipher strength. All of it's compliant. Everything's good to go. And of course, that last contact date. When did this machine last check in? Hardware audit report. Whenever a change gets made, we log it all here from that hardware compatibility list. New machines get added. I make a modification to an entry. We show all that information here. So I can see here, we updated, this entry, with the Lenovo information and stuff. We turned it from unknown to compatible. All this is logged, so we can easily see that information. All right. Kick it back over to Stein here to talk a little bit about reducing support costs.
All right. So reducing support costs, that can be a big cost driver for you all, right? And so we did a couple of things to help make this as easy as we can. One is to making sure we've got a secure, safe location to store the recovery keys and build an experience around that. We'll recap some of the things on the UI that really make sure that's an easy experience for your users. And a new feature within MBAM, which is the ability to have only a one-time use recovery key. So the big ones around the recovery key and the central storage of that is we store all 3 volume types of the recovery key for all 3 volumes. For the OS volume, however many fixed data volumes you may have on there, and as many removable data volumes as a user has, regardless of how many USB sticks or otherwise. And the other big thing is these are stored inside of MBAM's database. It's not stored in Active Directory. And so for some customers, they've said, hey, can I still store it in AD? Yes, you can, but you don't need to. You can just go straight to SQL Server or to the MBAM servers. It'll be stored there. It can also be stored in an encrypted form using SQL Server's transparent data encryption functionality so that the keys are safe on the SQL Server volumes. The other thing we did around making this more flexible is making sure we built this in a 3-tiered architecture. In a minute, I'll show you the help desk experience that we have, the presentation layer, to make it really easy for Tier 1 or Tier 2 help desk to be able to get the recovery keys and give that to the user. We've also just talked about the database, making the bottom layer, making sure that it's in a secure, reliable way, storing those recovery keys as you need it. But a lot of the flexibility and business logic is built into the web service layer. And why we're calling that out as an important element is if your organization is actually one where you want to build more custom experience, integrating with existing tools or other scenarios, we've exposed the presentation layer uses the same web service APIs as we expose to you to run with that. So it's the same experience. And so what you get out of that is making sure you get all the logic of matching the key to the users and the recovery key ID. And you also get, importantly, the logging of that. So regardless of a successful or failed attempt to get keys, you'll know who requested it, when they requested it, and which volumes they tried to get that for. So really valuable information. The other key thing, so with the recovery key UI, there's 2 types of recoveries that you'll want to do. First one is around BitLocker itself. And so if a user forgets their PIN or password or their TPM chip somehow gets corrupted, you've got a way to unlock BitLocker. And so we provide those keys. The other one is a TPM. And so this is outside of BitLocker, but it's still integral. So if you need to get the TPM hash to be able to unlock the TPM, say the user forgot their PIN, but they stubbornly typed it in like 6 times over and the TPM specs anti-hammering kicked in, this is a way for you to go unlock that. Or if you've got a machine that you haven't found and need to unlock that TPM, you can do that. And so that's just bringing the same functionality that you have with Windows 7 and AD and making sure this provides a good parable solution as that. And again, like we talked about is, regardless of a success or not, we're going to store and log that, so you've got full audit history around that. Now what we've done inside of the web service and the UI is this 2-tiered roles. The first role is designed for your standard help desk folks. And what we do there is to make sure that only the authorized users are getting the recovery key ID, we do a pairing. We make sure that only the users that have ever logged into that computer are being able to get that key. And so what we do is when the agent runs and it uploads the recovery key to the server, as part of that payload, it'll grab all the users that were authorized or have used that computer in the past. And so that becomes the authorized list on the server. And then so when a user calls up to the help desk and say, okay, I'm locked out, I need help, they'll provide their username, and they need physical access to the machine to get that recovery key ID. And so those two together provide the authorization to give the key out. Tier 2 is less structured on that. Tier 2 is, as long as you've got physical access to that machine, you can get the recovery key. And so whether that becomes really valuable is, let's say an employee suddenly leaves the organization, but you still need access to that data. You'll be able to get to that information this way without having to know who the user was or anything like that. And so obviously you'd want to limit who gets that, but it's a very effective way to make sure you've got what you need as a company.
Another good example is where you find machines in a closet that have been sitting there for months, and they're all BitLocke encrypted, and you have like no idea who had that box. Easy. Give the tier 2 guy access. Give it to that guy who can just get the recovery ID and go from there. So.
Okay. So this is an exciting new feature that is with MBAM. And so, one of the great things is you've got the ability to recover a machine, but once that recovery key has been exposed, if the user writes that down and sticks it on a sticky note, or if it's emailed to them and they print it out and send it on the computer, that's a big vulnerability, right? So what we've done is added some smarts around this to know when has a recovery key been exposed, and when has that recovery key been used. And so through that, what we do is once a computer's been unlocked and it can successfully talk to the MBAM servers, we'll recognize that's been exposed, and the agent will create a new recovery key. And that'll push the new recovery key out. Once we know we've properly stored that new one, we delete the old one, and that whatever they printed out or written out won't be usable again. So that's a really effective tool for protecting your system. And the nice thing about that, completely invisible to the user. The user doesn't know that's happening. It's all happening behind the scene. And the other important thing to realize is, recovery keys are unique per volume. So a computer, as AJ showed earlier, can have many keys associated to the different volumes you have. Nope, wrong direction. All right, and as far as making this easy is, again, making sure that you can roll this out to your enterprise. A big push inside a lot of companies is making sure we've got standard users that are using it. So to make sure standard users can encrypt the computer, they can manage their PIN or password, we expose that in the same ways that you're used to with Windows through Control Panel, or also through right-click in Windows Explorer. But at the same time, we do some things to reduce the surface area exposed to the admin. What we do is we've got an MBAM UI experience, and so what we do there is we actually hide the Windows 7 control panel. We hide the Windows 7 right-click functionality, Windows 7, and replace that with our own. And so what we do there is we limit the ability to decrypt computers or suspend the encrypted state. Now again, the caveat there is they are admins. So if they're savvy, they may know how to use managed BDE, or they may know PowerShell or WMI. But the point is, it reduces one of the surface areas and makes it more difficult to do that when you can't move all of your computers to standard users.
Just a quick piece of clarification. We don't hide the entire Windows 7 control panel. We just hide the BitLocker control panel entry in the Windows 7 control panel. So we're not hiding the entire one, just the BitLocker side of it. So
a very important clarification. Okay. So as part of this screen, one thing that we didn't get a chance to demo earlier is we talk about giving the user flexibility. They can start when they want to. They can postpone when they want to. But it's also this idea of requesting an exemption. And that's a policy you can set. Let's say you want to deploy BitLocker to your entire accounting organization worldwide, but there's certain regions in the world where you've chosen that you don't want those computers to be encrypted. So here you can either, without having to select a specific policy for them, they can request exemptions through this, or if they're in an engineering group for some reason they don't want to encrypt their computers, you've got an opportunity to give them that behavior there. And so you can do that by requesting email support, redirecting to a web page, or actually just providing a phone number where they can call to get exempted from that. So again, giving some more flexibility to the users. Okay, So with that, why don't we show off the last little bit of MBAM. We're going to show you the help desk and some other features around that. Okay, so what we got is I'm going to show off an example where we did we set up earlier for a tier 1 user or a tier 1 help desk, where we'll first enter the domain and the user and the key ID. And one thing you may remember is there's a long key ID that comes with BitLocker, but you only need the first 8 digits of that. So we'll type that in here, 553C491C. And what we can do here as part of that is define why did this user call? Did they forget their PIN? Was it a TPM reset? You know, a variety of reasons. Let's say there was a BIOS change that occurred.
It's in beta. It's beta. It's beta.
So
there we go. See, there we go.
Yeah, that's the bug that's been fixed for our TM. It's just a timeout issue. So refresh solves that. So if I'm going to pause for that. Anybody tried out our beta from the deployment site?
Show hands.
A couple handfuls, good. So good. Yeah, that's great. So here's the recovery key ID. It's a long set of code, so we'll type that in. So that was tier 1 where you need this pair matching. If I had tried to do that with the wrong, well, I'm not going to do it again. If I had tried to do it with the wrong password, you would have seen expected errors to prompt the user to make sure it's correct. But let's go back to the scenario where we did. How was our encryption doing from the
Well, so I've rebooted the machine. So all we have to do is cut over to my machine, and we can show you kind of what we're going to need to do to get this thing back up and running here. So, all right. So for those of you who are not familiar with BitLocker, right now it's prompting me for the PIN that Stein set up front. Let's say I'm a user and I just forgot my PIN. What am I going to end up doing here, right? I escape to get into recovery mode, and I have to call Stein and say, hey, I forgot my PIN. And what I have to read to him is the key ID information at in the middle of the page here. So basically, I would read to Stein and say, okay, my ID is this, my domain is this, and my key ID, the first 8 is E7, 6C71EC, right? And once he does that, and once I give that to him, he's going to pump me out the actual recovery key that I can just type in here. So, what?
5-4.
Well, actually, hold on. You've already typed it in, so why don't we show them what it is? So
here's tier 2, where again we don't need to provide the domain user ID. We can enter just the first couple values of the key ID, and then provide that back. Yep. So as AJ types that in, we'll do that. The other important thing here, though, is we talked about one of the reports. How can you audit who's had access to the keys? So we'll switch over to one of the reports here, the recovery audit report. And what you can see here is a list of audits, and you can see we demoed the heck out of this before coming in. And so we've got a long list of recovery, of audit history here. But here's the most recent events that have happened, with our local time being 4:08, where we've successfully grabbed the key, and we're providing the reason code in here. And some of the value that we have with this process, or with this report, is if you want to see how frequently people are calling in, you've got that. But also there can be some troublesome users out there, right, that forget their password frequently. So if you want to do audits, things like that, you can always enter the requestee's name in there and go with that. So that's our key report with tracking audits. How are we doing on?
Well, we never showed them the hardware console thing. We should show them hardware compatibility, right? You guys should look at that. That's actually really cool.
Okay. And so this is the hardware site. And like this, here are some of the clients that have uploaded their information up to the server. And so what you can see here is we've got 4 machines listed. The bottom one, the Toshiba, when new computers are registered, they're uploaded in a state of unknown. And then what we can do is take, like, for example, this Toshiba, and we can set it as supported. And just by doing that, simple transaction of doing that, you can multi-select as you'd expect. The other thing we can do here is you can edit or manually add hardware if you want to. And so here's a simple screen of providing the right values that you need to. And so when the client communicates up with that, to say, yay, do we go forward with that or not? So, and selecting their state. Okay,
So
with
yeah,
that,
and that's pretty much, my machine's back up and running here, so let me just kick over, and since Stein gave me the recovery key, I'm able to get back into my machine without a problem now. So pretty straightforward and simple. Once I typed everything in, I'm logged back in, and now Stein will basically just say, remember your PIN, AJ, don't forget it going forward. So, all right.
and probably one thing to show there is the single use recovery. So earlier, you may remember, this is the code that we had there previously.
Now we have to hook.
And you can see we've got now a different recovery password. So that's changed in the background very quickly, very effortlessly on behalf of the user.
So yeah, so if we were to go back to the website, type all that in again, that recovery key that he originally gave me would not be there, and I would get a brand new recovery key instead. So, all right. Software and hardware requirements. You're all probably wondering, what box does this thing need to run on? What are the requirements overall? Server requirements. Need to have Windows Server 2008, Service Pack 2 or higher, or Windows Server R2, or Windows Server 2008 R2. You need to be running, most SKUs, so standard enterprise data center or web server. Basically, we're using IIS, for a front end, right? So that's where all the web pages and everything you see. And then there's a SQL database on the back end, so you need to have SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2. And then the hardware requirements right now, basically if it will run SQL or IIS on those platforms, you pretty much have a machine that will run MBAM. Client requirements. We support Windows 7 Enterprise and Ultimate. Those are the only two supported clients for the MBAM agent itself. If you want the beta to try all this out, I've got the link on the page here. It's on Connect. You can also go to Connect and look for it there. But I would highly recommend, if you're really interested in looking to deploy BitLocke in your organization and want a great way to manage it, go get the beta, put it in a lab, install everything on a single server. It works really well on a single server box, and just start using it and give us your feedback. We have a feedback tool on the Connect site. If you find bugs or anything else, let us know, and we'll see what we can do. And as I mentioned, MBAM will be part of the desktop optimization pack, or actually as we call it, MDOP. MDOP has 6 products in it today. Things from application virtualization or Microsoft Enterprise Desktop Virtualization that helps you virtualize a Windows XP instance and run it underneath the covers of Windows 7. We've got an asset inventory service that helps you inventory machines. We have desktop error monitoring. Some of you are probably familiar also with DART, or the Diagnostic and Recovery Toolset. Helps you repair machines that are no longer bootable. So if a machine for some reason blue screens or just won't boot into Windows, I can give you a Windows RE environment with some additional tools to help you bring that machine back to life. I can also have better control over group policy by adding workflow and additional permissions around it so that certain people can request changes to group policy and some people can only approve it, or even run reports on differences between policy versions from one to another and even roll them back. So that's a high-level view of MDOP. Track resources, obviously we're wrapping up here from, track resources. There's a lot of information out there around the cloud in general. We highly recommend you go take a look at that. Of course, complete evaluations to win some great prizes. And of course, tag. So at this point in time, we will do Q&A. And I will say, if you have questions, I would recommend you go to the microphones, and I also have prizes for good questions. So...
Does that mean don't be insulted if you don't get it?
No, we have plenty of prizes. It's just the question is, how fast will it go? I got luggage locks and some other ones here. So I guess first question in the middle here.
Yeah, the question I had was when you're changing the recovery key when it's been compromised or exposed or whatever.
Yeah.
We're also saving it to Active Directory. Does it change in Active Directory as well?
Yeah, if you leave the policy, the dual policy, where it's backing up to the MBAM server and AD, yeah, it'll be passed up to both places. What doesn't...
Actually, I'm trying to remember, does it actually?
What I'm not certain of, and I'll just be honest that I'm not certain because I can't quite remember, is will it clean up the old keys? Because in our MBAM server, it'll recognize, okay, we got rid of the old keys, here's a new one. Here's the only active key there. I don't recall what AD's behavior is if it will delete the old ones or persist those with the new ones, even though they're inactive.
I know when we rebuild machines with BitLocke or the same machine name, we get duplicate key entries, and
yeah.
we probably have to write some sort of PowerShell.
Yeah, so that might be a limitation to it, where for MBAM, we recognize when we do that, and as part of the state of creating that single-use recovery key, we delete the keys that are no longer valid.
But the numerical ID should be different in AD, so when you rebuild a machine anyway, you get a different numerical ID, so when you end up in recovery mode, you know it's the numerical ID is ABC123, so it's easier to find anyway, so, yeah. So, question on the left side.
In the enterprise, when you have a RH computer or a board of directors computers, only some specific technical staff will be allowed to decrypt them. So can you have multiple like zones so you can delegate different recovery agent, different people?
I think
So I guess to make sure we understand the question. So is there a way to say that only certain people can manage certain machines from a BitLocker standpoint with MBAM, and then like so if you have one group that say covers North America, they can only access North America machines, but then they can't touch the European machines which are managed by somebody else through MBAM.
Yeah. So that role model is not built into this first generation of MBAM. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but you'll probably do that through distinct policies or distinct setting up different servers to do that. So you can do it, but it's not a installation out of the box that does that.
Yeah. I would say you probably would, if you wanted to get it that granular, it'd be you have an MBAM environment in North America, one in Europe or something else, and just point them all there. So.
Okay. Good.
Question on launch. Question on the far right.
Yeah, you mentioned that I guess the decryption key or whatever is available for everyone that logs into that machine. Did I understand that earlier?
Yeah. Based on anybody that's successfully logged into that computer, we pass that set of users up as users on that computer to the escrow.
Okay, so in the setting where you have multiple machines with multiple users that share it, in other words, someone's dedicated.
A shared, pool.
And then one of those individuals, let's say, promotes out of that area and moves to another one. You really wouldn't want that key being available. Can you individually delete those keys? Is that capability of this product?
Well, it's built on single source. It depends on how you want to go about doing it. So yes, you can. There's a couple ways to do it. I should know this answer. One of the things I'm hemming and hawing on is because that key is passed up every 90 minutes by default, what I don't remember, and I should know this, so I apologize, is it the current set of users? Like if that user that's been promoted and moved out is no longer a valid user on that box and shown in that list, if they're no longer there, as that's passed up, will they show as a user? I think the answer is that list is updated. So as long as they're no longer a valid user on that machine, they'll no longer be a valid user passed up and stored centrally.
So what makes them a valid user? Having a profile or having been logged in recently?
Having been logged in recently. Yeah. So there's some cleanup you could do locally around that for that user if you needed to.
Middle.
So the question I have is around the compliance issues.
Compliance, okay.
We looked at moving from a checkpoint solution for our workforce to BitLocke. And one of the problems that we had with it is to maintain PIPS compliancy, we would have to turn off a lot of the features that you guys offer. The store the keys in active directory, for instance. The recovery pretty much at that point shot us in the foot to manage it. So with MBAM coming out, is that something where we will be able to leverage that technology in a PIPS compliant mode, or are we still going to kind of be?
Yeah. The issues you called out, the restrictions that BIPS imposes on organizations is still valid. And so, for example, BIPS, you're not allowed to use a key, a protector that is based on a password generation. So the whole recovery key, the fact that that is stored centrally, recovery key as a whole is not a valid way to unlock in the PIPS mode. So what BitLocke, to answer your question more short, I could go on for a little bit on the PIPS mode because it's tricky. To answer your question, MBAM does nothing special on top of BitLocker to support and run with FIPS. What you have out of the box it can do, but it's got all the same limitations. So for example, in a FIPS mode, you'd want to use DRA as a recovery method, not the central storage. So you could still have a policy-driven client. You can still do reporting. But the third element, that as I kind of simplified it, the key recovery is something you wouldn't have as part of a FIPS deployment.
Because we weren't sure if with MBAM being that your keys were now in the secured SQL table, that would kind of
Yeah, it's not, yeah, and that's what's tricky about FIPS, is it's not about how the data is stored, it's the fact that BitLocker uses a key that's created off of a password. That's the problem with FIPS, and they don't allow keys that are generated from a password to be used as a protector or as a key. So it's not how it's stored or where it's stored, it's that type of key. And that's why DRA works.
I got 3 questions.
Okay?
The encryption key that's on the SQL, does the software encrypted that key inside the SQL and decrypted when it's retrieving it, or it stores clear text inside the SQL?
Yeah, so the question is more around SQL Server and how does the transparent data encryption functionality work. And so SQL Server's, what it did, it's the disk, it's the data itself that's encrypted. And so it's not, I'm trying to think of the exact question you asked, but the data itself is encrypted through SQL Server and transparent data encryption. And so as you read it, you can read it in the clear if you're an authorized user of SQL Server, and that's why we're able to see it, on the UI and stuff like that. But if you're not an authorized user, you're not going to be able to get to it. Or if that disk is pulled out of that SQL Server, that data is encrypted, and you won't be able to see it that way.
Then the other question I have is doesn't have anything with BEM, it's just the bit itself is the software update. Because the issue is how do I push my software if I'm using the encryption plus PIN?
Right. So there's a couple things around patch management, and that's a common question, so I'm glad you asked that. So how do we handle patches in general in a BitLocker environment, and does MBAM do anything special on top of that? Does that summarize the question? So we basically leverage all that BitLocker has to offer, and so what you can do is if it's an OS patch, something comes out, the signatures that come with the Microsoft patches don't force you to have to suspend and resume. But if there are some other patches where you do want to do that, you'll want to use WMI scripts to go ahead and suspend the encryption, to go out, push out the patch, and then resume encryption after that. So it's the same process we have with BitLocker.
And we'll see. Well, we also see organizations using, if you just do TPM on a desktop, since that machine's almost always connected to your network anyway, if you do TPM alone, the end user doesn't really see any difference at all. The machine just reboots after you patch it and reboot it, and the end user just gets the control-delete prompt. They're not prompted for a PIN. On a laptop, though, obviously if you do TPM and PIN, pushing the patch out to that machine, realistically, the machine's got to be online, connected to your corporate network where you're getting the patch from. So the user's logged into the machine already anyway, and they're going to get prompted to reboot. So the user's in front of the machine, they'll be prompted to reboot, and at that point, then yes, they'll see the PIN, but the user should be in front of the machine at that point. So I would say from a patching standpoint, I have not seen a Microsoft patch that is put BitLocker in recovery mode, but from an end user standpoint, depending on how you implement BitLocker, can drive that experience. So again, if you kind of go down the route of TPM only on desktops, your end users don't see anything anyway. TPM and PIN, your machine's got to be turned on anyway. That laptop, if it's not on, you're never going to get patches to it anyway. So the user's got to be logged into the machine to get the patch. So I would say that's probably less of a concern there. So.
And last is a comment. When does Microsoft plan to take BEM and tie in configuration manager, which makes so much sense at this point?
So configuration manager support, more or less.
Okay, yeah. So it's something we know we want to do. It was a tough trade-off. In V1, we just said, hey, let's get a solution out there to market. I can't really comment on future plans, but we know that is a highly desired feature for customers of SCCM and BitLocker.
Yeah. So, yep. Middle. Oh, short. Sorry.
Hard drive fails, and you want to use stuff like Dart or something like that to go in and use some of the utilities to rebuild it on an encrypted drive, can you still use the tools with, can you still get a key to unlock the drive to do the work?
Yeah, so the way that Dart works is that if your machine is encrypted, it will prompt for the recovery key. So you'll just go into the help desk tool, grab the recovery key information and type that in, because Windows RE is what it relies on. RE prompts you for that information before you even get to the Dart tool section. So yes, you can do it that way. Nope. Okay. Next question in the middle.
These are cool locks. You got to get one.
Yeah, travel locks. They're great things. Ooh. Question in the middle. In the back.
The SCCM integration, but what about the reporting? Is there a way, is there an easy way that we can take the information from the server and import that into the SCCM so that our reporting is all integrated?
Right.
So
There's
not full integration, but just enough that we can make sure our reports are completed.
Yeah, and that's a good caveat I always need to add when we say we don't integrate with SCCM, but there's reporting, you've got a few options. One is you could do database to database integration, something like that. But a more, I think an easier way to do that is just using some WMI scripts to go out and pull the set of users and pull that into your SCCM. I think there's some good Technic articles, and it's a pretty common way people today, without MBAM or anything else, have done reporting around their BitLocker deployments in an organization.
But again, also they are databases. You could just pull the information from the database.
Exactly. You've got
machine name is machine name, right? I mean, you could just marry up on machine name and stuff like that and pull them together if you really wanted to. So if you want to create custom reports that way and select the information into SCCM, it's just a database.
Does that help?
Yes, that does help. One other thing, is there a way to run the client piece, the service? Is there a way to use that by itself without the back-end server? Understanding I've been giving up a whole lot, but just the management, allowing the user to put in their PIN and that sort of stuff, just independent, and of course keeping the AD back.
Right.
But
I don't think we do, because one of the things that I'm 99% certain when I say that is and the reason I'm not 100%, in the MDT scenario, we allow this override to not escrow keys. But that was kind of a special case in that scenario with some tricks that we enable there. But in the standard scenario where the user is encrypting it, one of those design beliefs we had is you got to make sure that user's never in a bad state. So we got to make sure that key is always backed up. And so we rely on the MBAM server to do that. We didn't build any mechanisms to decouple that and say just go to AD or something else.
But in that particular scenario, the laptop is already encrypted. It's just the matter of the user logs in the first time. I want to make sure they can put in their PIN.
Right.
We're putting, one of the last things the deployment does is make sure that the policies are in place such that, we want to say, yes, please enforce TPM and PIN. And then whenever the user logs in the first time, they need to put in their PIN. And, there are administrators, that sort of thing, and really hoping that this tool can be used and kind of,
Okay. I get the scenario. Yeah, so it's already been encrypted, so you don't have to worry about the encryption process kicking in to see if the escrow is there. But if the agent will just change that from a TPM only to a TPM plus PIN because of policy, will it work? I haven't tested that. I don't know.
It's because it's registry keys that we're looking at anyway. So that's a good question. I think
it's not necessarily a supported scenario. We kind of designed it around because, again, we want to store it. Could it work? It might. Yeah.
I think that's a research question.
Yeah, I can take that as an action item. You're welcome to ping me afterwards, or if you want to just play with the beta and try that, it'd be a pretty easy way to test that.
Come up front and I'll give you my card and we'll track it down for you. And that's a really good question. So I have a really good prize. So.
All right.
Taken from the statement you made earlier,
There you go.
that you hide
My business card. So just.
currently our company's policy with BitLocker, we have a manufacturer who issues a lot of BIOS updates, is we suspend the BitLocker product when we do the BIOS update, so as to not have to invoke the key recovery.
Right.
Is there any way within the product to do that now, or is it just going to have to be a script?
Yeah, that's one of those things that we rely on BitLocker in the way of management. We have not done anything special on top of that.
But currently I can go through the control panel and suspend it. And
Oh.
what you're telling me is once I go to MBAM, I won't have that option available to me.
Well, the UI surface area is removed. You can still use manage BDE. The command line that we were using there, you can still use WMI to do that. And is the scenario you're talking about, are you doing that centrally, or are you actually going to different computers and doing the...
We're actually trying to do it with a package, with an SCCM package.
Right, and so there you'd want to use WMI scripting, which with what I talked about disabling the UI doesn't impact that. You can still, it doesn't change that behavior. You'll still be able to do that through WMI scripts to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I've got two questions.
Are we?
Have you been there? I don't know who. No, that's fine. Okay.
If we play the beta and get it working like we want it and all that, will you, like your release candidates and your final version, will everything upgrade? Or are we going to have to like uninstall and reconfigure everything?
Sorry, if you're using today's beta, what's our plan to help you go from beta to production? So what's nice about the design that we've done is because that agent, every time it runs on the computer, it passes up the recovery key. So you can literally completely wipe out your server back end, and that agent's going to start running and going forward, recreate that. There's two issues you'll have with that. One is your hardware capable, not capable list, because you need to recreate that, but you can always back that up and re-import that because that's a database. The other one is around the TPM. And this is a really important note that I probably should have mentioned when more people were still here is TPMs are interesting. People get kind of confused between TPMs and BitLocker, and it's completely different than BitLocker. And the only time that BitLocker can store the TPM hash or MBAM can store the TPM hash is when at the point where we're taking ownership. And so if you've used MBAM to take ownership of the TPM, that hash has been stored in our database. And then if you turn around and then completely re-image your servers and get that up again, even though MBAM took ownership of it, it doesn't have access to that hash, and so it won't be able to upload that. So that's another piece of data that you'll want to make sure you kind of set off and can re-import. And so I can't commit to this, but one of the things we're going to try to make available when we GA is some SQL commands that are available to export, re-import those things.
And have y'all considered like adding like email alerts if someone turns off like encryption for some reason, letting it send an administrator an alert so we would know that somebody's turned it off or it's in a bad state?
In our first version, no. We kind of just had to hit, we knew timing was big, so we made some big choices around timing. Yeah, so no.
That'd be a good future enhancement.
I like it, absolutely.
Couldn't you also do reporting? I mean, couldn't you just, in SQL Server reporting services, you can email the report to yourself and say, show me all the non-compliant machines. So just send me a report every day or something like that that just says, these are the non-compliant machines, and obviously you can see what's going on there.
Yeah.
Out of the box, you can't. There's lots of different ways you can to do that. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Well, I'm going to get a little bit out of the way for the next speaker, but I'll go ahead and keep taking questions.
One more question on the left here. We'll go question on the left.
Okay, you said I can store the keys in AD and in the SQL Server. So how much data is produced per client, and does it make a difference between storing that in the SQL Server or in the Active Directory?
Well, in order to use our help desk, you'll want to store it in the SQL Server database. As far as if the question was around size of the packets and things like that, they're a couple K, I think. So it takes a huge amount of volume to make a real dent in it. So I think either one is okay. But if you really want to use all the functionality of MBAM, making sure that's your primary. If you choose to use AD just as kind of redundant backup, you can. But when we talk about high availability and redundancy, SQL Server's got a lot of options for making sure you've always got access to the keys you need.
And you don't blow up your AD.
Excuse me?
And you don't blow up your ID.
Yeah.
AD, but like.
Yeah, so you're not. Your AD doesn't swell. Yeah. And I think we spoke earlier. If you have an older version of AD, because the 2008 and I think I know R2 and I think 2008, the schema already supports the Windows 7 AD backup.
Actually, it's 03 is the first version that didn't support it. So 2008 and 2008 R2. So yeah, I think you're right. So
2003 does not, out of the box, have that schema support where you'd have to customize it. Yeah.
So
okay.
Not to beat the System Center issue to death, the specialized help desk functionality, getting the recovery key, all of that sort of thing, is that exposed in a way that's consumable by service manager, or do we have to maintain a separate service desk specifically for MDOP?
Are we talking about system center integration with service manager and config manager?
Right. The help desk functionality for getting the recovery keys,
Right.
the problem codes, those sorts of things. Is that going to be available? Or?
Well, I can't talk about what we're going to do in the future, but today out of the box, we don't have any system center integration. But it's certainly great scenarios that make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Thanks.
Did we go through all the questions? Okay. Well, it's good to get off stage. It's blinding up there. So we'll be walking off. If you have any last minute questions, feel free to come up, say hello, and it's great to meet you. Thanks for your time today.